Hi everyone, and welcome to the next chapter of Nimzowicz's My System. So we're going to look at chapter 8 now, which is a short chapter, and what it concerns is discovered check, which I'm sure is something that all of you are very familiar with, and the ideas associated with it. But as with the previous chapters, it's good to have a review of the basics, and I also want to ensure that we cover every part of the text itself. And in order to get the most out of the second, much more complicated half of the book, it's necessary to understand every element of the first half completely and properly. So that's why we're going to go through this now. So on the board before us here, we can see the difference between the tactical ideas of pinning and discovered check. The knight on b5 is of course pinned, can't move because it's a rook, and the knight on e7 is in an identical position, but it belongs to the white side, and as a result it has become a very powerful attacking force due to the unveiling of the rook behind it when it moves. As with the pin, there are three actors on the stage here. Firstly, a piece that would give a check if it was not masked by another, i.e. the rook on g7. Secondly, a piece which is blocking the way of the check, the knight, and finally the piece which is laying behind the king. And of course this can be another piece such as the queen, but then we're not talking about discovered check, we're talking about a discovered attack, so it's slightly different. So to reiterate, the chief difference between this setup and a pin is that the piece in the center of the arrangement has not only huge power, but also mobility, as it cannot be captured after its first move. And this rare power gives it the ability to do many things, such as capture any opposing piece without fear of recapture, or attack a heavy piece or any vulnerable loose piece in the enemy camp. And thirdly, it can exchange the square that it is on for any other that it considers a positional improvement, if there's nothing better to do. So let's take a look at an example. It's white to move, and he's threatened with a queen takes g1, which is going to be mate. But of course he's not too worried about that due to the powerful setup of his pieces, which give many ways to actually win the game quickly now. So to go through the options we just mentioned, white can play rook takes a5 with discovered check from the bishop, and of course the rook can't be captured because it's check. Although this line would be losing for white, but it's still a good way to illustrate the point. An example of B, i.e. attacking a major piece, can be performed via rook e5. Again, we check from the bishop, winning the queen and the game. And C, moving to a better square, can be achieved by taking into account that the bishop on g1 would love to capture the queen, but it's pinned in the initial position, that is here. So rook d1 check, and after any king move such as king c7, now bishop takes e3 because rook d1 broke the pin, and again this is an easy win. And this third option of moving to a better square is something of a special case and takes many forms. Probably the most famous of these is the windmill. In this position it's white to move, and with 4 pieces and 2 pawns against his queen, he would usually be in trouble with everything else being equal. However, everything else is certainly not equal in this position. The important thing to notice is that white has a move that forces the black king to a very dangerous square, and that in turn will allow him to perform the discovered check. So from this position it's actually a forced mate in 13. If you want to try and figure it out, then stop the video now. The move, of course, is bishop h7 check, which gives black only one move. It is king h8, after which comes bishop takes f5 with discovered check, forces king g8, and now again bishop h7 check, king h8, and bishop takes e4 check, and so on. King g8, bishop h7, and all these pieces are just going to get snapped off. Bishop h7 check, king h8, and so on. And king g8. And that was the easy part of the puzzle. But now you had to find a forcing mate in 3 from this position, which comes as follows. Rook g6 check, f takes g6, bishop takes a2 check, forcing rook e6, and now bishop takes e6 is mate. So an extreme example of the very powerful force that can come from the idea of discovered check. The whole point of the bishop taking all the pieces, other than simply winning the material, was to sacrifice the rook and win the crucial a2 to g8 diagonal. So that was a relatively straightforward example. Now let's look at a more subtle case. This time it's made in 5. Again, if you want to try and figure it out, then stop the video now. The point here is that the bishop on d5 is preventing white from delivering mate with bishop h7, and after king h8, bishop g6 check, and then queen f7 is going to be mate, and it's not made at the moment because the bishop is covering f7. So the correct continuation is to distract it away as follows. Firstly, bishop h7 check, and after king h8, bishop c2 check, which has the effect of improving the position of the rook on d2, which is now free to move along the second rank without having to worry about being captured by the rook on a2. Black's answer is forced, king g8, now rook g2 check, forcing bishop takes g2, and now white has achieved what he needs and can play bishop h7 check, king h8, bishop g6 check, king g8, queen h7 check, king f8, and queen takes f7 mate. So now let's look at an example from a real game. This is the position after black's 20th move. Tor with white was playing Lasker in Moscow in 1925. White's position is dangerous because his rook is attacked by the queen on a5, this rook here on e1, and there's also a pin on his g5 bishop because if it moves, his queen is going to fall. Tor found the best move with b4, as dealing immediately with the threat on his rook. Lasker answered with queen f5, although queen d5 was probably better. It's important to note he can't play queen takes b4 or rook b1 is problematic. So queen f5 and now rook g3 because the rook was attacked by the queen. And now Lasker played h6, aiming to exploit this pin. But because he had played queen f5 instead of queen d5, Tor could now play knight c4, threatening knight takes d6 and just holding the balance in the position. So now came queen d5 to defend d6 and also to attack the knight. If instead h takes g5, knight takes d6, and white's doing well. So queen d5 and now knight d3 attacking the queen again and thus saving the bishop. Tor is playing with great energy to break the pin on his bishop, and it's only due to the upcoming discovered check motif that he's able to do so. Now came queen b5, which is a tactical blunder. If instead queen takes d4, rook d1 is good for white, just by the by. So queen b5 and now bishop f6. the shocker. And it's important to note that Tor has forced the black queen to an unprotected square with his play, which is what makes this whole sequence possible. Or black could just play a defensive move here, like, well, it's not a good move, but f6 or, you know, knight g6 or something like that. So now comes, of course, queen takes h5. White gives up the queen, but he's winning by a long way after rook takes g7 check, king h8, and now we see the power of the windmill. Rook takes f7 check, king g8, rook g7 check, king h8, rook takes b7 check, king g8, rook g7 check, king h8, rook g5 check, wins back the queen. He doesn't want to snap up this pawn because it open lines for black. So after king h7, rook takes h5, king g6 is getting the piece back. After rook h3, king takes f6, but now simply comes rook takes h6 check, and white went on to win fairly easily. He's 3 pawns ahead here. So a nice game from Tor and a very instructive combination. Another element we should consider is a different variation of discovered check, when the piece that moves to allow the check also gives the check itself, i.e. double check. This has great power behind it, as two methods of answering a check, blocking and capturing, are ruled out, meaning that the defending side will have to move his king. For example, let's consider the following position. Here the double check results in an instant mate with the obvious combination: queen h8 check, king takes h8, bishop f6 check, double check, the king must move, so only square is g8, and now rook h8 is mate. Another example is as follows. Here the knight and the bishop form a powerful battery, given black's weak dark squares. White can finish in style with queen h8 check, king h8, knight takes f7, it's double check, forces king g8, and now knight h6 is mate. So now we can close this chapter on discovered check with a couple of well-known examples from gameplay. The first is from a game between Reti and Tartakower. Reti has white here. He opened with e4, then came c6, the Caro-Kann, where we followed one of the many main lines with d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight f6, and now the eccentric queen d3 to defend the knight. This is an unusual continuation, and one that Tartakower tried immediately to refute with e5. And White's surprise tactic has worked. This was not the strongest move. Better, according to Nimzowitsch, was knight takes e4, queen takes e4, and knight d7 with knight f6 next, in a solid position. The game continued after e5, d takes e5, queen a5 check, bishop d2, queen takes e5. So threatening to win the knight, simply is two pieces attacking it, only one defending. So now came a great move from Reti, castling long, offering the knights, and Tartakower amazed history by accepting knight takes e4. Better was simply bishop e7 with rough equality. After knight takes e4 comes the shocker queen d8 check, king d8 and bishop g5 with double check, forces mate next move. Tartakower played king c7, allowing bishop d8, and a very nice mate. If he played instead king e8, then rook d8 is mate. So a very nice play from Reti. The final example comes from one of Nimzowicz's own games, played at a simul in Pernau. It went as follows. E4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. The Roy Lopez, nothing unusual so far. Knight f6, castles, d6, d4, knight takes e4. which is a bad blunder from Nimzowicz's opponent. Now comes, of course, d5, exploiting the pin on the knight. So after a6, bishop d3, and because this knight is also loose, white must now lose a piece. Nimzowicz's opponent played knight f6. If he plays instead knight e7, hoping for f5 and e4, if bishop takes e4, he gets into trouble after bishop takes e4, f5, bishop d3, e4, rook e1. And now if e takes f3, white is a long way ahead after queen takes f3. Or if e takes d3, then queen takes d3, and again white is doing very well. So knight f6 anyway. So d takes c6, e4, rook e1, d5. And now a great move from Nimzowitsch. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Bishop e2, just giving back the piece when he could have played knight d4 and held on to both of the forked pieces. So e takes f3, his opponent played, which is a bad blunder, taking the knight. C takes b7 is how Nimzowitsch continued. F takes e2 doesn't work because the e pawn is pinned, so the rook will fall and white will have two queens. So bishop takes b7, and now bishop b5 with double check and mate. So of course such situations are rare, but we always do well to keep their possibility in mind. Okay, so that concludes this section on Discover Check, and we'll move on to Chapter 9 next. Hope you found that instructive. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.